Welcome back everybody to another video. We're going to be talking about the Battlescroll again, and in the last video we talked about the big losers from the Battlescroll, and so those were factions that lost a lot from the changes, mostly in points, but there were also some rules changes. Now that's not to say that those are factions that are going to be bad now, because they might still be competitive or viable, but today we're going to talk about the biggest winners. Now I have a few disclaimers here. The biggest winners are factions that got help or improved, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be broken or, top of the charts. And I'm definitely not the person to judge that. So at the end of the day, I am a relative beginner when it comes to competitive Warhammer. And so I don't want to stand here or sit here and talk about, these are going to be the meta picks or anything like that. And I don't want you to watch my video and look at me as an expert on a bunch of factions that honestly I haven't played before. But I will give you my opinion based on all the things I have learned about Warhammer, and that includes watching a lot of games, keeping up with tournament results, reading lots of opinions online, on Discord, on Reddit, and various other places, and then just looking at the Battlescroll and, seeing what we see. So the first faction that I want to talk about are the Blades of Khorne, and so they had multiple changes happen here. And so the first one is a pretty significant rules change. And so they hit a faction ability called Skull for the Skull Throne, which is now once per turn instead of once per battle round. This was an ability that let you spend your Blood Tithe points to unlock different things on the Blades of Khorne, like kind of skill tree of different faction abilities. And because you could only do it once per battle round, you couldn't unlock that many abilities. And if you unlocked one in the first battle or first, turn, you couldn't do it in the second turn of that battle round. And that was it didn't really make sense, because if you're earning the points, why not just be able to spend those, especially if maybe a lot of things didn't die in one round or did die and then the next one they did, or I don't know, the way that it worked didn't make a lot of sense. And so this is a really good change. A lot of people actually predicted this change when the Battletome came out. And so I'm really curious to see if this allows people to accelerate their skill tree development and allow them to get into more talents or whatever, and how that actually affects games. Either way, it's just more fun for Blades of Khorne players, and so that's really good. We also saw every single Bloodthirster come down in points, and that makes the all Bloodthirster Army of Renown easier to play, specifically because the Wrath of Khorne Bloodthirster is now 400 points, which means it's now possible to run exactly 5 Bloodthirsters in that army. But if you run the regular Khorne rules and you want to run all Bloodthirsters and you want to mix them up a little bit, you might still run 4, but you'll have more wiggle room to include some utility pieces as well. We should also talk about Gloomspite Gitz, who were at the bottom of the poll here in terms of results. They were doing really poorly, and they got some massive point changes for them, but they also saw a rules change. And so what we saw is the Careening Destruction for the Sunstealer Wheelers. This was something that allowed you in a movement phase to leave combat, move through enemy units, through their combat ranges, and you picked a unit that you moved across and you could deal them some mortal wounds. But this is now doable on both turns. And so it means that you can be doing it a ton, right? You can charge your Sunstealer Wheeler into an enemy, tie them up on your turn, and then when it goes to their turn, you can tie them up again. By the end of their movement phase, all of their movements are done. Then you get to use this ability and you can move right off of that unit and avoid another combat, but you've still tied down their unit because they've lost their chance to move on that turn. And so it's really effective for that, but it's also really effective because using it every single turn, and you're only using it on one unit of Sunstealer Wheelers, probably reinforced, and they did go down in points, but that means that you can also move on to objectives. You can move between your enemy and objectives or screen your other units, and that's going to be really impactful. And then you're just able to deal consistent mortals. Every single turn, you are dealing mortals. And so that makes this a priority target for your opponent to disrupt and hopefully get rid of these Sunstealer Wheelers. But if they are putting that into them, and they can be pretty bulky, they have that kind of tar pit capability, then that means they're not going after the rest of your army. And the rest of your army, by the way, just went down by a whole lot of points. And not just, you know, some of the lesser seen units, but we're also seeing a lot of, you know, squig and trog units all go down in points, including also some heroes like the Dankold Trog boss, Trog the Troggoth King, and then Skagrot also went down a bit. And so a lot of viable pieces are now going to hit that critical mass where you can just bring all of them. It is a race to the bottom. It's not the best form of balancing, but this is one of those times where a faction can win the race to the bottom. And I'm gonna go out on a limb. I don't know if this is a big take or anything, but I think Gloomspite's gonna be good after this, and that's cool because they've spent some time at the bottom. I think the last time Gloomspite saw some good results was like at the very beginning of 4th edition. If there was another point in the history where they looked good, let me know. But as far as I can tell, it's pretty much been all downhill since the start of 4th. So good for them, good for Gloomspite players. And I know there's a lot of Gloomspite players out there. It's a very popular faction, and so they do deserve their time in the sun. So now I want to talk about some factions that saw a lot of changes, but I don't necessarily know that that's going to make them winners overall, but we should still discuss them. And if you are a player of this faction, then I would love to hear what you think about it. And so first of all, Seraphon saw some really big point drops army-wide. Out of the 15 heroes in the faction, 10 of them had their points decreased. Out of the 20 units in the faction, the non-hero units, 8 more of those had their points decreased. And we also saw the faction terrain go from being 20 points to 0 points. And so the Realm Shaper engine, which is the faction terrain, is a pretty good piece because it basically dishes out mortals pretty consistently, and to bring that for free is a big deal. What this equates to is probably bringing an extra unit, maybe 2, depending on how cheap the unit is. But we also saw some pretty important units get decreases, like the Agrodon Lancers, which have been an absolute staple for Seraphon players. But even both Kroxigors, Lord Croak, and a lot of these changes were by 10, but those things do add up. However, this again is just point decreases. It doesn't change any of their rules, and Seraphon is still in a tough spot. I think they're hoping for their new book before too long, and we know it is coming, but I do think that a lot of Seraphon players are still going to be hoping for their book to bring some new and exciting rules that can make their faction a little bit more competitive, because they're running on a PDF, a faction pack at this point. Stormcast Eternals also saw a ton of green, and we're also not seeing any red here, and a lot of big 20 to 30 point drops for heroes. And this is really fun for a lot of Stormcast players, because if you want to go into Ionis or Iridan, and not the soggy version, or if you want to go into Bastion like Carthalos, and he has an army of renown, you can do that. Krondys came down. That's really cool. And we saw a lot of different units also, so more heroes came down, and then actually a lot of units came down, but none of the big impactful units that were making the those big meta lists, like your long strikes and stuff like that. Those are still staying the same. But either way, all of this is going to equate to bringing an extra Stormcast unit, and bringing an extra Stormcast unit is generally better than other armies bringing more units because of the stats of the Stormcast units, but also the ability to have more bodies to contest with, and to teleport, right, or to deep strike, and that just gives you more options. And so that does give me a little bit more hope than Seraphon. I think they have a little bit more going for them. There's 0 increases. Some of the top factions came down, and so that should make it a little bit easier for Stormcast to fight for some better results in the tables. So then we come to Ironjawz, which also saw basically all green on almost everything in their faction. And there's some pretty cool stuff here, like Brutes, which are a really good unit, getting a 20 point decrease. That's a unit that you want to reinforce and probably run a lot of. And we have seen some cavalry focused, some pig focused lists do well recently in tournaments. We saw a 4-1 recently from a player from the Pacific Northwest. And so there are some okay lists, but the core of the army at its heart is an infantry orc list, and that's not doing it right now, and nothing has changed to make it better. Anybody that was playing Ironjawz will tell you that their army, maybe they can run a single unit more and a cheaper unit like a Brute Ragers or something. and it's not actually making a significant difference in what their army was able to put out, and what their army was putting out on the table wasn't able to do well, and that's reflected in the tournament stats. Aside from that kind of divergent pig list, it's been a really hard time for this slow infantry faction to just compete with other factions that have way more tricks, way more rules that can do something. Ironjawz is really struggling from having an early battle tome that barely changed the faction pack, and they deserve a little bit more love, in my opinion. And I am slightly biased now because my brother got into Warhammer. He picked Ironjawz, and I want the best for my brother. So shout out, bro. Hope you get some cool stuff from Ironjawz. They need, again, like last season, we had the Field Sergeant rule, which gave +2 inches of movement, in a bubble from a hero, and that was really big for Ironjawz to have just basically all be on 6-inch move plus Mighty Destroyers. We need something like that to come back, or some sort of rule that helps them out. Could be Ironjawz specific, could be seasonal. I mean, we're not going to get a seasonal rule until next summer anyway, but still, I think they need a little bit of help. That's kind of what I'm gathering from basically lurking in the Ironjawz forums of various places and just talking to players about it as well. I also wanted to mention some honorable mentions for Sylvaneth, Hedonites of Slaanesh, and Slaves to Darkness, who basically saw all green, and I think Slaves to Darkness saw like a couple red, but nothing significant. And so all of those factions can bring more to the party, and all of them I thought were okay factions. I've played against Sylvaneth multiple times in the recent past, and I really thought they were a pretty good faction. And Slaves to Darkness always can threaten just because of the nature of like a quick, fast game and getting at you. And so when they can bring more, that's going to help them out in order to compete, especially in the longer game. And Hedonites of Slaanesh also, like, they have a lot of really cool rules, in my opinion. I'm actually pretty into them in terms of what they can do, and they had some pretty big decreases for some of their models. And so I don't know enough overall about those three factions to say to do a whole section on them, or to like really predict how that's going to affect them. It didn't seem like they got as much of a help as the factions that I did do little sections on, but if you play Hedonites of Slaanesh or Sylvaneth or Slaves to Darkness, and you want to chime in the comments and let me know what you think about those changes, how it's going to affect your faction, if you think you're going to get kind of a boost here, or if it's going to be more of the same, just let me know. I'm happy to hear your thoughts on that. And with that, we're done talking about the winners of the September 2025 Battlescroll. And so I'm very curious about your thoughts on the Battlescroll in general, and you can also let me know what you thought about this video in general. I don't think it was as insightful as the losers video was, but I'm still learning. I'm still working on it. So you can let me know what you'd like to see, if there's certain stats or discussions or things like that you want to see happen in these videos, because I think if these videos are well received, then I would be really happy to keep doing that every time a new balance update comes out. I think that would be really fun. So otherwise, I'll see you all soon in another video. Thanks for watching this one.